How does a single spark ignite a total wildfire of change? Well, that is the story of America in the 1960s and 70s. We're going to dive into this incredibly turbulent and, truly transformative era where all these social movements just erupted. Sometimes they worked together, sometimes they clashed, but they were always pushing to reshape the nation. But here's the thing. To really get that explosion, you first have to understand the pressure cooker it came from. So let's rewind a bit back to the 1950s, an era that was selling this image of, well, perfect harmony. The gap between the promise and the reality of the 50s, it was just massive. I mean, America was projecting this image of booming prosperity, happy suburban families with a car in every driveway. But right underneath that shiny surface was a society built on some really deep, painful inequalities. It was this promise of freedom, sure, but only if you fit into a very, very specific mold. And this whole worldview, it actually had a name, the consensus. And it wasn't just about politics, no. It was this really powerful social force that prized conformity above all else. And it punished anyone who dared to challenge the super narrow vision of who was supposed to belong. And that was the system that was about to get challenged, big time. So what was it that finally lit the fuse on this whole pressure cooker? Well, the first and most powerful spark was without a doubt the civil rights movement. More than any single law they got passed, the movement's greatest victory was showing people that change itself was actually possible. It proved that these deeply entrenched, centuries-old systems of injustice could be confronted head-on, and they could be changed. That was a huge realization. The civil rights movement basically created a blueprint, a kind of playbook for change. It was this powerful combination of grassroots organizing on the ground, disciplined nonviolent protest, really strategic courtroom battles, and these powerful moral appeals that just captured the nation's attention. They forged a set of tactics that, as we'll see, others would soon pick up and run with. And yeah, that spark did not stay in one place for long. It ignited this massive wave of activism that swept across the entire country. All of a sudden, it wasn't just one group demanding justice. You had students marching against the Vietnam War. Women were challenging the norms that had limited their lives for so long. Native American, Chicano, LGBTQ+, and disability rights activists, they all rose up, demanding recognition, demanding power. The flames of change were spreading everywhere. And this was absolutely not a coincidence. These new movements were very consciously learning from the civil rights struggle. They literally took that blueprint for change we just talked about and adapted its powerful lessons for their own unique fights. It was a direct inspiration. But this wave of activism wasn't perfectly unified, not by a long shot. As more and more groups joined the fight, some pretty serious tensions and fractures started to show up. And these conflicts were clear and they cut deep. For instance, women activists often found themselves stuck making coffee and typing memos inside the anti-war or civil rights groups. That sparked this huge feminist realization that the personal is political. At the same time, some of the more established civil rights leaders, they started to worry that the really radical rhetoric of some newer, more militant groups would scare off allies and put all their hard-won progress at risk. And this all fed into this fundamental disagreement on strategy. Should all these groups unite and form one big front, or was it better to focus on their own distinct, urgent issues? And this leads us to the central question that historians are still debating today. Did all this incredible energy combine to create one powerful engine for social change? Or did all the infighting and the competing agendas end up limiting their collective impact? It's a question with no easy answer, for sure. So, after all that upheaval, what was the long-term result? Let's take a look at the legacy of this revolution. So while these movements were challenging the social order, other events were shaking up the political one. The brutal realities of the Vietnam War and the violence at protests, all of it broadcast right into people's living rooms every single night. That deeply, deeply eroded public trust in the government itself. You can actually draw a direct line from that era to our own. The activism of the 60s was met with a really powerful conservative resurgence in the 70s, which was partly a reaction to all that perceived chaos. And this clash of forces, it helps set the stage for the deep political polarization we are all living with today. So why does any of this history matter right now? Well, because the core questions from that era are the very same ones we are debating today. The fights for racial justice, for gender equality, for LGBTQ+ rights, and that fundamental debate over what the role of government should even be, all of it has direct roots right back in this explosive period. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. When we look back at all of this, how do we even measure the success of these movements? Is it just about the laws they managed to pass? Or is it also about the difficult, messy, but absolutely essential conversations they forced an entire nation to have about its own identity and its ideals? That's definitely something to chew on.